This was how a wicked biker stumped on Keanu Reeves' pet dog Daisy after shooting a movie on set. What began as a dare among the ruthless bikers soon escalated beyond their very own control. Kindly subscribe and stay tuned as we uncover the shocking details and escalation of this story. It was a typical summer afternoon in Brooklyn Heights, the sun casting long, lazy shadows across the streets. The area was buzzing with its usual energy, tourists strolling, locals chatting, and the occasional dog walker passing by. The neighborhood had a peaceful charm, with its cobblestone streets and row houses, but on this particular day, the calm would soon be shattered. At the heart of it all was Keanu Reeves, who had just finished a long stretch of filming for his latest role in John Wick. The set, temporarily set up in the area, had been bustling with activity all morning. Crew members rushed about, cameras rolling, lights adjusting, and sound equipment whirring. The scent of street food wafted in from nearby vendors, offering an aroma of hot dogs, pretzels, and roasted nuts, adding to the lively atmosphere. After a long day of shooting, the director, a no-nonsense type with a loud voice, called a break. "That's a wrap for this scene, folks. Take an hour for lunch and meet back here when it's time to resume," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the crew dispersing. The crew sighed in relief as they made their way to the catering truck, eager to fuel up before the next round of shots. Keanu, however, had other plans. He had become quite attached to Daisy, the pit bull that had been featured in the movie's scenes. Daisy had played a significant role in the film, and Keanu had grown fond of the dog over the past few days. "Hey, Keanu, we're heading to that new deli on Atlantic Avenue. Want to come with us?" one of the crew members called out, a friendly smile on their face. Keanu turned to acknowledge the voice but quickly waved them off. "Thanks. But I think I'll stay here and take Daisy for a walk," he replied, his attention shifting to the dog. Daisy was panting heavily, his tongue lolling out of his mouth from the heat of the afternoon. The crew member shrugged and waved. "Suit yourself. We'll catch you later." Keanu knelt down to Daisy, his large hands gently ruffling the dog's fur. "You look like you need a break too, Daisy. How about we go for a walk? A nice quiet one, away from all this chaos." The dog, sensing Keanu's kindness, gave a soft whine of approval, his tail wagging enthusiastically. Daisy's handler, a lanky man with a clipboard under his arm, hesitated before speaking up. "Mr. Reeves, if you don't mind, I can handle Daisy's walk. That's my job after all." Keanu smiled and shook his head. "It's all right. I'd really like to do it if that's okay with you. It'll help me bond with him, and I'm curious about what it's like to have a dog for a while." He made a face. "Besides, I've never really had one." The handler seemed unsure but nodded. "Okay, Mr. Reeves, just make sure he's all right. He's a good dog, but he can be a handful at times." Keanu reassured him with a smile and took the leash. The handler handed him a few plastic bags and a collapsible water bowl. With a final check of the supplies, Keanu was ready. "Thanks, I'll be careful." "Don't worry." Keanu bent down to Daisy, attaching the leash to the dog's collar. "All right, Daisy, let's go for a walk." With that, they set off, leaving behind the bustling set and heading into the streets of Brooklyn Heights. As they walked, Keanu took in the familiar sights of the neighborhood, his mind briefly wandering back to the set. He had always enjoyed working in Brooklyn Heights. It was vibrant, eclectic, and full of life. But today, there was something different in the air. The heat seemed to weigh everything down, the sidewalks almost empty, save for a few passers-by. Daisy, meanwhile, seemed more and more agitated. His panting intensified as they moved, and Keanu noticed the dog's increasing discomfort. "I know, Daisy. It's hot," Keanu murmured. "Let's find a water fountain, all right?" They walked for several blocks, the warm pavement reflecting heat waves into the air. Keanu looked around, scanning for a place where they could find some shade and, hopefully, some water for Daisy. As they approached a corner, Keanu's eyes locked onto a sign, "Iron and Ash." The faded letters seemed to echo through the air, signaling a place where bikes roared and the smell of gasoline hung heavy. Keanu hesitated, sensing the change in atmosphere. There, parked in front of the bar, were gleaming motorcycles, powerful and imposing like sentinels guarding a fortress. The roar of engines and the occasional shouts of bikers made Keanu's grip on the leash tighten slightly. Still, his eyes drifted to the side, catching a glimpse of a public water fountain nestled between two parked motorcycles. It was a small oasis, a potential relief for Daisy. "Let's go get you some water," Keanu said to the dog, guiding him toward the fountain. Daisy eagerly drank from the fountain as Keanu filled the collapsible bowl. As they were standing there, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms approached. He paused beside Keanu, glancing at Daisy with a soft smile. "Nice dog you got there," he said, his voice gruff but friendly. "Pit bulls get a bad rap, you know? Same way we bikers do. Loyal to a fault, both of us, if you treat 'em right." Keanu chuckled, appreciating the man's words. "You're right about that," he replied. "There's a lot more to both of us than meets the eye." The man nodded, then headed toward the door of iron and ash, leaving Keanu to observe the steady stream of bikers entering and exiting. Keanu took the opportunity to relax, watching as Daisy finished his drink. Just as he was about to leave, a waitress from the bar emerged, her face lighting up when she saw Daisy. "Oh, what a handsome boy!" she exclaimed, kneeling down to pet him. Daisy responded with a gentle lick, and the waitress laughed. "He's kinder than half the men inside," she whispered, giving Keanu a playful wink. Keanu chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment," he nodded, tipping his hat in appreciation. As they prepared to leave, however, the atmosphere shifted. From a distance, Keanu heard raised voices, loud, aggressive. A group of bikers had gathered around the waitress, who stood her ground, her voice firm. "I told you yesterday, your gang's not welcome here anymore," she said, her tone unyielding. "After what happened last time, the boss made it clear. You're banned." Keanu's protective instincts flared as the situation quickly escalated. One of the bikers, a hulking man with a shaved head, stepped forward menacingly. "Move aside, sweetheart," he growled, "or we'll move you ourselves." Bookmark. The air was thick with tension, as Keanu stood frozen, the situation rapidly escalating before him. His instinct was clear. He couldn't just stand by and watch, especially not when Daisy was involved. But Keanu wasn't a man given to rash actions. He had learned over the years to keep his composure, especially in moments like this. Yet even he could feel the adrenaline starting to rise, the familiar feeling of danger creeping up his spine. He watched as the waitress, despite the fear creeping into her eyes, remained resolute. She had clearly dealt with situations like this before, but even Keanu could tell she was now outnumbered and outmanned. He could see the bikers towering over her, their stances menacing, their voices growing louder and more hostile. "Move aside, sweetheart," the burly biker with the shaved head growled, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "You've got no say in this. We're not leaving." Keanu's eyes flickered to Daisy, who was standing next to him, his body tense and his tail low. The dog wasn't growling, but Keanu could feel the animal's unease. This wasn't just about a fight over territory. It was about dominance, intimidation, and control. Before Keanu could take another step, one of the other bikers emerged from the crowd, his voice low but resolute. "Hey, enough," he said, his tone warning. "You heard the lady. Time to go." The biker who had been the loudest, the one who had shoved the waitress, hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he locked gazes with Keanu. For a brief moment, it felt like time stood still between them. Keanu could see the hate flickering behind the man's eyes, but it was tempered by something else. Fear, perhaps. He knew who Keanu was, and Keanu knew this wasn't a fight he should start, but neither could he just walk away. The other bikers, seeing the tension, started to back up a little, sensing that the situation could turn quickly. Keanu made the decision then. It wasn't about fighting, but he wasn't about to let this escalate any further. "Let's go, Daisy," he said in a calm voice, taking a firm grip on Daisy's leash. He led the dog away from the brewing conflict, but not before casting one last glance over his shoulder. The bikers had taken a step back, but the one who had instigated the confrontation was still glaring at him, rage in his eyes. Keanu moved away, walking briskly but with purpose, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing as they distanced themselves from the volatile situation. Daisy trotted beside him, his usual carefree gait now slightly subdued as if sensing the undercurrent of danger that had just passed. Keanu's thoughts raced. He didn't like leaving things unfinished, especially when it came to situations like this. As they walked, Keanu's mind began to work through the conflict that had just unfolded. This wasn't the first time he had encountered this kind of aggression in Brooklyn Heights, but it was the first time he had seen it up close. The biker gang, Iron and Ash, had made a name for themselves in the neighborhood. But it was clear they weren't just about motorcycles and loud music. There was something darker lurking beneath their tough exterior, something that had started to reveal itself. And Keanu knew it wouldn't be the last time he encountered them. Keanu and Daisy continued their walk, heading away from the chaotic biker bar and into the quieter streets of Brooklyn Heights. The city felt different now, more oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something he couldn't ignore. He had done the right thing by avoiding the confrontation, but he wasn't at peace. Not yet. They turned the corner onto a narrow, tree-lined street, the shade offering a bit of relief from the harsh midday sun. The sound of the traffic seemed farther away now, muffled by the canopy of leaves above them. Keanu's thoughts drifted back to the earlier moments. It wasn't just about Daisy, it was about what was happening to the community, the way things were slowly spiraling out of control. As they walked further, Keanu spotted a quaint cafe tucked on the corner. It had a laid-back vibe, a quiet escape from the noise of the city. There were a few people sitting at tables outside enjoying their lunch, but it wasn't crowded. Keanu felt an immediate pull toward it. He needed a break, a moment to process what had just happened. He approached the cafe's outdoor seating area, the welcoming smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods mixing with the air. Daisy seemed to pick up on his mood, slowing his pace, his ears perking up as he noticed the open space. Keanu found an empty table and slipped Daisy's leash from his collar. "You stay here, Daisy. I'll grab us some coffee." The dog, obedient as always, flopped down on the chair next to him, clearly exhausted from the morning's activities. As Keanu stepped inside to place their order, the door chimed softly and a waitress greeted him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said, her eyes immediately landing on Daisy sitting patiently at the table outside. "Is that your dog?" Keanu smiled back, appreciating the attention Daisy was receiving. "Yeah, his name's Daisy," he replied. "He's a good boy." The waitress leaned against the counter, glancing back at Daisy. "He looks like a real sweetheart," she said with a smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" Keanu quickly placed his order, a coffee for himself and a small steak sandwich for Daisy. He added a special request, asking for an extra portion of steak for the dog, who was sure to be hungry after their walk. "Coming right up," the waitress said, turning away to prepare the drinks. Keanu felt his muscles relax slightly as he waited. It was a rare moment of peace, and he knew he needed it. As he sat down outside again, Daisy's tail began to wag lazily. Keanu took the time to reach into his jacket and pull out his script, spreading it out on the table. His mind wandered back to the film, to the set, but his thoughts quickly drifted back to the situation he had just left behind. The encounter with the bikers still gnawed at him. He had managed to avoid a fight, but it didn't feel like a victory. His coffee arrived, and he sipped it slowly, his mind still racing. The food would be coming soon, and Keanu hoped the rest of the day would pass without incident, but that hope was dashed all too soon. Bookmark D2V6. Keanu was in the midst of enjoying his rare moment of calm when the atmosphere around him suddenly shifted. He had just taken another sip of his coffee, Daisy resting peacefully by his side, when a loud, unmistakable sound filled the air. The unmistakable screech of tires followed by the roar of a motorcycle engine. Keanu's instinct kicked in, his attention snapping toward the sound. His eyes immediately locked onto the source. A group of bikers, their engines revving with a menacing intensity. It wasn't the same group as before, but the sight of their leather jackets and the aggressive swagger in their movements was all too familiar. They were making their way toward the cafe, and Keanu could feel the tension building in his chest. Daisy, sensing the change in the air, began to stir. The dog's eyes darted nervously, and Keanu reached down, giving him a calming pat. But it was too late to avoid the confrontation. The bikers approached the patio, their voices carrying over the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of other patrons. Keanu's gaze remained steady, watching them closely. He had a sinking feeling in his gut that this wasn't just another ordinary interaction. The bikers weren't just passing by, They were here for something or someone. "Hey," one of them called out loudly, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Nice dog you got there. Looks like a tough guy, huh?" Keanu remained silent, choosing not to engage immediately. His hand rested on Daisy's back, the dog's tense muscles beneath his fingers a sign of the unease that had settled into the pit of Keanu's stomach. "You think you're so tough," the biker continued, stepping closer to the table. "Walking around with a dog like that? Don't you know what happens to animals in places like this?" The man's tone grew darker, more threatening. Keanu's heart began to beat faster, his protective instincts flaring up. He had been in countless confrontations on film sets, but this was different. This wasn't acting. This was real. And this was about his dog. Daisy's tail stiffened, and he gave a soft growl, sensing the aggression in the air. Keanu's grip tightened on the dog's leash, but he didn't stand up yet. He wasn't sure if this was just empty posturing or something more dangerous. "You really want to test that?" The biker spat, his voice full of menace. "Maybe your dog doesn't belong in a place like this." He looked down at Daisy, who was now growling low in his throat, his body tense. Keanu stood slowly, his eyes narrowing, his body language shifting. His calm demeanor was about to be tested, but he wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "I think you should leave," Keanu said quietly, his voice laced with the calm confidence that came from years of being in control of chaotic situations. "I'm not looking for a fight." The biker laughed darkly, clearly not expecting Keanu to respond with such poise. "Not looking for a fight? Too bad, because you're going to get one anyway." The situation was escalating quickly, and Keanu's senses were on high alert. This wasn't just a casual confrontation. This was a power struggle, an attempt to assert dominance in a place that was supposed to be peaceful. And in that moment, Keanu realized something. This wasn't going to be solved by words alone. Bookmark. Before Keanu could fully react, the biker's hand shot out, a swift motion meant to provoke. With a suddenness that caught Keanu off guard, the man kicked Daisy hard in the side, sending the dog tumbling to the ground with a startled yelp. The peaceful cafe atmosphere shattered, replaced by the sharp sound of Daisy's distress. "Daisy!" Keanu shouted, his voice filled with alarm as he immediately dropped to his knees, reaching for the dog. The cafe patrons stared, shocked by the aggression, some of them beginning to stand, but nobody dared to step in. Daisy, despite the initial shock, scrambled back onto his feet, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. He growled, his protective instinct fully activated now, but Keanu could see the fear in the dog's eyes. This wasn't just about a kick, it was an act of cruelty, and Daisy was simply responding to it. Keanu's anger flared like a wildfire. He stood up with alarming speed, his eyes locking onto the biker, whose smirk faltered when he saw the fury building within Keanu. "You just made a huge mistake," Keanu said, his voice cold and steady, though there was an undeniable edge to it. His muscles were taut with the intensity of the moment, and his body was ready to act. "You hurt my dog, and now you're going to pay for that." The biker didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, sneering as he prepared for a confrontation. "What are you going to do about it, actor boy?" His words were dripping with contempt, a challenge that Keanu had no intention of backing down from. Daisy's growls became more frequent, his body still tense but not quite ready to lunge. Keanu placed a hand on the dog's back, his touch firm yet soothing. "Calm down, Daisy," Keanu murmured. "I've got this." He turned back to face the biker, eyes narrowing with determination. "You don't get to hurt innocent creatures, not on my watch." Just as the situation seemed poised to erupt into chaos, a shift occurred. Another biker, one Keanu hadn't noticed before, emerged from the group. He was shorter than the others, with a face hardened by years of life on the road. But there was something different about him. He wasn't here for the fight. All right, the newcomer said, his voice louder now, cutting through the tension. He stepped between Keanu and the original biker, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Let's not do something we'll regret, all right?" Keanu didn't lower his guard, but his eyes flickered in the direction of the new arrival. He could sense the man wasn't fully on the side of the aggressors, though Keanu wasn't sure of his motives just yet. The first biker, still seething, took a step back, his eyes burning with rage. "This is none of your business," he spat. The newcomer's eyes locked with Keanu's, a silent understanding passing between them. Keanu wasn't sure what had caused the man to step in, but at that moment, he was thankful. "It is now," the man said firmly. "Let's get out of here before things get worse." The biker who had kicked Daisy glared one last time at Keanu before storming off, muttering under his breath. The remaining bikers, sensing the confrontation had diffused, began to follow suit. Keanu, still shaking with adrenaline, took a moment to steady himself, breathing deeply. "Thanks," he said to the man who had intervened, though his voice was laced with a quiet intensity. The man gave a brief nod, offering no words, before he turned and followed the others. Keanu, meanwhile, bent down to Daisy, who was now shaking, still reeling from the attack. "You all right, Daisy?" Keanu whispered, his voice softer than before. Daisy's eyes locked onto his, and after a tense moment, the dog wagged his tail weakly. "Good boy," Keanu said, his hands gently rubbing Daisy's head. He looked around, noticing the concerned gazes of the other cafe patrons. "I'm sorry about that," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But inside, he was seething. He had managed to avoid the worst, but the anger still simmered beneath his calm exterior. He knew this wasn't over. Whatever had happened at Iron and Ash had only just begun. The tension in the air lingered long after the bikers had left. Keanu's heart was still racing, the adrenaline from the confrontation pumping through his veins, though he worked hard to keep his calm. He didn't want to draw any more attention to himself or Daisy, but there was something about what had just transpired that gnawed at him. Daisy, for his part, seemed to be slowly recovering from the shock, his tail now wagging softly, though his body was still tense. Keanu kept his hand on the dog's back, rubbing gently, trying to reassure him. "We're all right now?" Keanu whispered, his voice low and soothing, though a slight tremor betrayed his own unease. He felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, he hadn't been able to prevent the attack, and that bothered him. Daisy had been hurt, and even though it wasn't serious, it still felt like a failure on his part. The cafe patrons had begun to resume their conversations, but there was a certain wariness in the air, a lingering unease that hung over the cafe like a storm cloud. Keanu could feel their eyes on him, but he chose to ignore them. What mattered now was getting Daisy out of there. With a final pat on Daisy's head, Keanu stood, ready to leave the scene. He motioned to the waiter who had served them earlier, still lingering nearby, seemingly unsure of whether to approach. "We're going to take off now," Keanu said, his voice steady, "but thank you for the food and the calm." The waiter nodded quickly, still wide-eyed from the events that had unfolded before him. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I'm glad you're all right." Keanu offered a brief smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He needed to move on. This was not the end of the situation. It was merely the beginning. As Keanu left the cafe and stepped back onto the street, Daisy by his side, the gravity of what had just happened began to settle in. He didn't feel any better about the incident. No amount of walking away could erase the image of Daisy being kicked or the tension that had surged through him in that moment. Keanu wasn't sure what would come next. The bikers at Iron and Ash hadn't just been aggressive. They had been a threat, not only to Daisy but to the neighborhood. That realization dawned on him slowly. The confrontation hadn't been an isolated event. This was a pattern. The neighborhood had been changing, and not for the better. He turned to Daisy, his expression softening. "You're all right, Daisy," Keanu murmured. The dog gave a low whine in response, pressing closer to Keanu's leg as they walked. They had to get back to the set soon, but Keanu needed to clear his mind, to figure out what his next move should be. As they walked down the quiet streets, Keanu's thoughts drifted back to the bikers, the ones who had caused all this trouble. Iron and Ash wasn't just a biker bar. It was a symbol of something darker, something more dangerous, that had started to infect the peaceful streets of Brooklyn Heights. Keanu felt a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't let this slide. He couldn't let the bikers keep intimidating the locals and harassing people. Not when he had the chance to make a difference. Daisy's continued quiet whine brought him back to the present. They had a few blocks left before they reached the set, but Keanu's mind was already racing. He had been in Hollywood long enough to know how to avoid trouble. But this was different. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't acting. This was real. As they neared the set, Keanu's thoughts remained tangled in the mess of the morning's events. His commitment to Daisy and the community grew stronger with every step. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't simply walk away. They arrived back at the bustling film set, the crew still on their lunch break. Keanu led Daisy to a shaded area near the trailers, where the dog could relax while Keanu took a few minutes to gather his thoughts. He crouched next to Daisy, rubbing his ears affectionately. "You did great, Daisy. You've got to rest up now," Keanu murmured, speaking softly but with a deep sense of relief that the immediate danger had passed. But as he stood, his mind was already calculating. He needed to do something about Iron and Ash. He couldn't let those bikers run roughshod over the neighborhood, not after what had happened to Daisy. Keanu had connections, people who could help. He wasn't sure yet who he could trust with this, but he knew he had to act. There was no going back. He had made the decision in that moment on the street. He wasn't just going to sit idly by. Keanu walked toward the catering truck, his mind spinning with plans. He needed to talk to someone who could help him take this situation to the next level. There was one person he could think of, the right person for the job. Sheriff Hank Morrison. Hank had been a trusted ally for years, someone Keanu had known even before his film career had taken off. Keanu had always admired Hank's calm, steady hand when dealing with complicated situations, both on and off the job. Hank had connections that could be useful, and if anyone could help take down Iron and Ash, it was Hank. Keanu pulled out his phone and dialed Hank's number, waiting as it rang. "Keanu?" Hank's voice came through, low and familiar. "What's up?" Keanu took a deep breath before speaking, knowing that this conversation was going to lead to something serious. "Hank, I need your help. There's a biker gang in Brooklyn Heights causing trouble. They've been intimidating people, and now they hurt my dog. I need to do something about it, but I don't know how far I can go." Hank's voice was steady, professional. "I hear you. I've had a few reports about them. Iron and Ash, right?" Keanu nodded, even though Hank couldn't see it. "Yeah, that's the one. They've been a problem for a while, but now I think it's gotten worse. I need to know what you can do, and if you can help me get them out of here. I don't care how it gets done, but I need action." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Keanu could feel the wheels turning in Hank's mind. Finally, Hank spoke again, his voice firm. "You don't need to worry. I'll handle it. I'll gather some people and put a plan into motion. Stay safe, Keanu, and don't do anything rash." Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him. Hank was the kind of man who could handle things without making a mess. The sheriff had the resources, the authority, and the experience to take down a group like Iron and Ash. "I'll wait for your call," Keanu said, his voice steady. As he hung up the phone, Keanu felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The ball was now in Hank's court. All Keanu had to do now was make sure Daisy was okay, and everything else would fall into place. So guys, in the next episode, we will see exactly how the revenge of Keanu played out and the shocking truths the sheriff discovered about the Iron Bikers. Kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on the post notification so you do not miss out on the next episode. I love you all. In the last episode, we saw how devastated Keanu was after his dog Daisy was kicked aggressively by the biker from Iron and Ash. In this episode, we shall see the comeback of Keanu and how he regained justice for Daisy. Kindly subscribe to the channel and like the video if you love Keanu Reeves. Thanks a lot. Now let's proceed. Keanu leaned back against the wall of the trailer, his thoughts swirling in a mix of anger and determination. The quiet hum of the film set seemed distant now, almost irrelevant in the wake of the morning's events. Daisy, still lying at his feet, let out a soft sigh. His body relaxed now, but Keanu could sense the lingering tension in the dog. He was still processing what had happened, just as Keanu was. The phone call with Hank had been a relief, but it had also set things in motion, things that couldn't be undone. The sheriff's involvement meant that this was going to escalate. But Keanu didn't care anymore. He couldn't let Iron and Ash continue their reign of terror over the neighborhood. Not when it had personally affected him, and not when it had affected Daisy. As Keanu stood, stretching his arms and walking over to the nearby set of chairs, his mind raced. He had already decided that he wasn't going to wait idly for things to unfold. He would need to prepare for the worst-case scenario, especially if it meant dealing with the bikers head-on. But even with Hank on the case, Keanu knew this wasn't going to be simple. There would be consequences, and those consequences would affect more than just him. It would affect everyone in the area. The people who lived in Brooklyn Heights, the businesses that had been harassed, and the other innocent people who had found themselves caught in the bikers' path. His phone buzzed again, breaking through his reverie. It was a text message from Hank. "Everything's set. We'll move in tomorrow. I'll keep you updated." Keanu stared at the message for a moment, his eyes hardening. Tomorrow. That was when it would happen. That was when he would see if things would finally come to a head. But he didn't want to just sit around waiting for it all to fall apart. He needed to do something today. Keanu glanced down at Daisy, whose eyes followed him as he walked back and forth. "All right, Daisy," he said, crouching to give the dog a gentle pat. "You've been through enough today. I think it's time for us to head back to the hotel for a bit. You deserve some rest." The dog wagged his tail, looking up at Keanu as if he understood. It had been a long day for both of them, but Keanu wasn't sure if he would be able to rest. Not with everything that had happened. Not with the biker gang still looming over the neighborhood, like a shadow that could descend at any moment. As Keanu made his way toward the exit of the set, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The bikers weren't just going to roll over because the sheriff was involved. They were a dangerous group, and if they were cornered, they might fight back harder. He made a mental note to check in with Hank later. The sheriff would need all the help he could get to make sure the situation didn't spiral out of control. Keanu wasn't naive. He knew there was only so much that could be done through the law, and especially when it came to dealing with criminals like the bikers. But he had to believe that this was the right course of action. Bookmark. The walk back to Keanu's hotel was quiet, the streets still hot and the sun beginning to dip lower into the sky. The noise of the city seemed to fade with each step, and the only sound that Keanu could hear was the rhythmic patter of Daisy's paws on the pavement. As they reached the hotel, Keanu let out a long sigh. It felt good to finally be away from the chaos of the film set and the confrontation. He needed time to collect himself, to think about what would happen next. He needed a moment of peace before the storm broke. Daisy walked at his side, more relaxed now, his tail swishing from side to side. Keanu couldn't help but smile, feeling a bond form between them that went beyond just their professional relationship on the film. He realized that Daisy had become more than just a co-star. The dog had become a friend, a companion he never thought he would have. Inside the hotel, Keanu let Daisy off the leash and led him toward the small sitting area near the windows. He could see the lights of the city twinkling outside, but the room itself was quiet, a refuge from the chaotic world outside. Daisy settled onto the couch, curling up with a soft sigh, and Keanu took a seat nearby, leaning back and closing his eyes for a moment. The weight of the day was pressing down on him. He had fought in countless films, faced dangers on screen that had pushed him to his limits. But none of that had prepared him for this. None of that had prepared him for standing up to a gang of bikers who weren't just part of a script, but were real threats to the people around him. Keanu let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Funny, huh? Here I am, facing down bikers in Brooklyn Heights. I thought the toughest battles were always on set." Daisy lifted his head, looking at him curiously, as if he were listening to every word. Keanu smiled. "I'll be honest, Daisy. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'll do everything I can to make sure you're safe. You're not alone in this." Daisy's eyes met his, and for a moment, Keanu swore he saw a sense of understanding there. Maybe it was just the bond they had formed over the past few days. Maybe it was the shared experience of surviving the biker gang's aggression together. Either way, Keanu didn't feel as alone in the world as he had before. Later that evening, Keanu sat at the desk in his hotel room, carefully reviewing his lines for the next day's shoot. The words on the page blurred together, his mind wandering back to the bikers. The confrontation at the cafe, the threat against Daisy. It had all happened so quickly, and it left him with a strange sense of urgency. Despite his efforts to stay focused, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't going to be as simple as he hoped. Tomorrow's operation with Hank might bring some resolution, but it could also bring more trouble. The bikers were dangerous, and Keanu knew from experience that when a group like that felt cornered, they fought back fiercely. Daisy, now resting peacefully on the couch, let out a small sigh as if he understood the weight of the moment. Keanu turned toward him, feeling a surge of affection for the dog. It was strange. He had never imagined that his role in the film would lead to something like this. Yet here he was, in the middle of a real-life battle, with his loyal dog by his side. Keanu ran a hand through his hair and sighed deeply. "We'll figure this out, Daisy. We've made it this far. We can make it through anything." And as the night stretched on, with the city lights flickering outside his window, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything. Bookmark everything. Keanu woke to the soft rays of the morning sun filtering through the blinds of his hotel room. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded the day before. His mind immediately jumped to the events of the previous day, the confrontation with the bikers, the threat to Daisy, and the tension that had settled over Brooklyn Heights like a storm cloud. Daisy, ever loyal, was already up, his eyes following Keanu as he moved around the room. The dog's tail wagged lazily, but there was a palpable unease in the air. Keanu had been through a lot in his career, but nothing compared to the urgency of the situation he faced now. Today was the day. Sheriff Hank Morrison had set the plan in motion, and Keanu was going to be right there with him, ready to see it through. He had made a promise to Daisy, and he wasn't about to back down now. Keanu stood, stretching as he looked at his reflection in the mirror. His expression was serious, focused. He knew what needed to be done, but he also understood the risks. The bikers weren't going to go down without a fight. Keanu's role in this was far from over, and he was prepared to do whatever it took to protect the neighborhood, Daisy, and the people who had been living in fear. As he got ready, Keanu's thoughts turned to the text Hank had sent him the night before. It had been short, but Keanu had picked up on the gravity in the sheriff's tone. "Everything's set. We move in at 10 a.m. Be ready." It was 8:30 a.m. now. Keanu had a little over an hour before everything changed. There was no turning back from this. Whatever happened today would set the tone for the future of Brooklyn Heights. Daisy, as though sensing the shift, jumped to his feet and padded over to Keanu's side, offering a soft whine. The bond between them had only strengthened over the course of the last 24 hours. Keanu smiled at the dog and bent down to give him a quick scratch behind the ears. "I'll be back soon, Daisy," Keanu whispered. "We're gonna fix this, together." At 9:30 a.m., Keanu stood outside the hotel, looking out at the city streets. The sun was already beginning to warm the pavement, but there was a coolness in the air that hinted at the tension to come. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Hank. "Keanu," Hank's voice came through, clear and direct. "We're moving in. Be at Iron and Ash in 15 minutes. I need you to be there, ready to help us secure the area." Keanu's heart rate picked up at the mention of Iron and Ash. This was it. The bikers would have no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. "I'm on my way," Keanu replied, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline that flooded his veins. "Let's end this." Keanu hung up and looked down at Daisy, who was sitting by his side, waiting expectantly. "You ready for this, Daisy?" Keanu asked with a slight smile. Daisy wagged his tail, a signal that he was more than prepared. Keanu knew he wasn't just walking into a dangerous situation for himself. This was about something larger. The neighborhood had been under siege for too long, and now they were going to fight back. Keanu made his way to Iron and Ash with purpose, each step bringing him closer to the showdown that would either bring peace or escalate into something even more volatile. Bookmark HDL 9. The exterior of Iron and Ash was just as imposing as Keanu remembered. The weathered sign, the motorcycles parked like sentinels in front of the bar, it was the kind of place that exuded danger and lawlessness. Keanu stood across the street, watching for any signs of movement. His mind raced as he scanned the area, knowing that Hank and his team would be there soon. But as Keanu observed the bar, he could see the bikers already beginning to gather. They were getting ready, as if they knew something was coming. The air was thick with anticipation. Keanu's phone buzzed again. It was Hank. "We're in position," Hank's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Are you ready?" Keanu took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Ready. Let's do this." Keanu crossed the street, his pace slow but deliberate, his eyes never leaving the door of iron and ash. As he approached, he could see the biker who had kicked Daisy the day before standing outside with a group of others. The man's eyes locked onto Keanu's, his lips curling into a sneer as he recognized him. "Hey, actor boy," the biker called out, his voice filled with mockery. "Thought you'd be hiding after what happened yesterday." Keanu didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with a quiet rage that sent a shiver through the air. "This ends today." The biker laughed, but the sound was cut off abruptly as the first police vehicles roared into the parking lot. The sirens blared, and the officers quickly flooded the area, their movements sharp and coordinated. Keanu stood to the side, watching as the bikers were surrounded. It happened quickly, faster than he could have anticipated. Hank's team moved in with precision, securing the bar and preventing anyone from escaping. The bikers, realizing they were caught, began to resist, shouting and swearing as they tried to break free. But the law was closing in, and the weight of justice was bearing down on them. Keanu felt a sense of relief wash over him. The bikers were finally being held accountable, and the threat to the neighborhood was being neutralized. It had been a long time coming, but it was happening now. Daisy, who had been by Keanu's side the entire time, let out a low growl, his eyes focused on the scene. Keanu bent down, placing a calming hand on the dog's back. "It's over, Daisy," he said softly. "We did it." The police had successfully detained the bikers, and as Keanu watched the scene unfold, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. The bikers had resisted, but the law had prevailed. Hank's team had done their job, and the criminals were now in custody. The officers began to cuff the bikers, reading them their rights as they were escorted to waiting police cars. The entire scene felt surreal, like something out of a film. But this was real, and Keanu had been part of it. As the bikers were led away, Keanu stood in the midst of the chaos, the street buzzing with the sounds of police activity. He felt a sense of closure, but it wasn't a victory he would celebrate. It was simply the end of a dangerous chapter for the neighborhood, for Daisy, and for himself. Hank approached him, a small smile on his face. "You did good, Keanu. We got them. They won't be a problem anymore." Keanu nodded, his expression serious. "Thanks, Hank. You handled it well." "Wouldn't have been able to do it without you," Hank replied. "You were the one who gave us the push to act." Keanu looked over at Daisy, who was now sitting by his side, watching the action with quiet curiosity. It was the right thing to do. It's over now. Hank glanced at Daisy, then back at Keanu. "You and that dog seem like a good team." Keanu smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "Yeah, we are." As Keanu and Daisy walked away from the scene, the city felt different. The oppressive weight of the bikers' presence had lifted, and Brooklyn Heights seemed a little safer, a little more peaceful. The fight wasn't over yet. There would still be things to sort out, consequences to face. But for now, Keanu and Daisy could finally breathe easier. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they had made it through. The aftermath of the operation was a mixture of quiet satisfaction and reflection. The streets of Brooklyn Heights felt different now, less tense, more alive, as though a heavy cloud had lifted. Keanu walked alongside Daisy, his companion by his side, still recovering from the stress of the last few days, but now, more than ever, an inseparable part of Keanu's life. As they made their way back through the streets, Keanu couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The bikers were in custody, their threat neutralized for good. The community was safe once again, and while there was still work to be done, the worst had passed. Daisy trotted at his side, his usual exuberant energy slowly returning as the stress of the situation began to ebb away. Keanu smiled down at the dog, appreciating the quiet bond they had formed over the past few days. What had started as a simple walk to help him prepare for his role in John Wick had turned into something far deeper, a genuine friendship. They reached the park at the heart of the neighborhood, the one that Daisy had been too nervous to enjoy the day before. Keanu paused, glancing around at the peaceful scene, a small fountain, children playing, the hum of the city in the distance. But now there was a tangible sense of calm in the air. The neighborhood had weathered a storm, but it was coming out the other side stronger. "You know, Daisy," Keanu said, glancing at the dog as he sniffed the ground, "this place is starting to feel like home again." Daisy's tail wagged lazily in response, as if in agreement. Keanu could hear the faint sound of laughter in the distance, the clink of coffee cups, the chatter of neighbors returning to their normal routines. They took a seat on a nearby bench, Keanu leaning back with a sigh of contentment. For a moment, he simply allowed himself to relax, to enjoy the quiet, knowing that the danger had passed. The streets of Brooklyn Heights had been transformed, but it wasn't just the bikers who had changed. Keanu had too. He had gone from a man trying to survive the chaos of a film set to someone who had stood up for what was right. It wasn't the kind of action he was used to, but it had felt more real than any fight scene he'd ever filmed. It was strange, Keanu thought, how life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges your way. Just when you thought you understood the world, something like this happened. A simple walk with a dog had turned into an all-out confrontation with a biker gang. But in the end, Keanu had done what needed to be done, not just for Daisy, but for the community. Keanu's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, seeing the name of the producer on the screen. "Keanu," the producer's voice came through. "I just wanted to check in and see how everything's going." Keanu smiled, his tone calm, but still tinged with the events of the last few days. "Everything's fine. We got the bikers. The neighborhood's safe now." "That's great to hear," the producer said. "But I know that things have been intense. The last few days have been rough for you, I'm sure. How are you holding up?" Keanu glanced down at Daisy, who was now resting his head on his paws, his eyes half closed in contentment. "I'm good. Just needed some time to process everything. It's been a wild ride." The producer chuckled. "I can imagine. But hey, the team's ready to get back to shooting whenever you are. No rush, though. We'll work with your schedule." Keanu took a deep breath, looking at the city around him. It was a strange feeling, knowing that after everything that had happened, life would go back to normal. Or at least, a new version of normal. There would still be work to do, more scenes to shoot, more challenges to face. But for now, Keanu was content. "I think I'm ready," Keanu said, his voice steady. "But let's take it slow. Daisy and I have earned a little time to rest." "Well, you deserve it," the producer replied. "We'll be here when you're ready." Keanu hung up the phone and stood, offering Daisy a gentle pat. "Let's head back to the set, Daisy. We've got a little work to do." Bookmark. Back on set, the crew was busy setting up for the next shot. The energy was different now. Lighter, more focused. Keanu could see the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Everyone knew what had happened, but now they were more eager than ever to dive back into work. The tension had lifted, and what had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle now felt like a distant memory. As Keanu made his way to the set, Daisy trotting happily behind him, he could sense a change in the way the crew interacted with him. There were more smiles, more friendly nods. It was as if the shared experience of the last few days had brought them all closer together. The set had become a sanctuary once again, a place for creativity and focus, not fear. Keanu took a moment to check in with the dog handler, who was waiting near the trailers. "Daisy's doing well," Keanu said, offering the handler a smile. "He's ready for the next round." The handler grinned. "Glad to hear it. He's a great dog. You two have a special bond." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, it's funny how you can get attached to a dog so quickly. He's been more of a partner than I ever expected." Daisy sat at Keanu's feet, looking up at him with bright, trusting eyes. Keanu ruffled his fur affectionately, his thoughts still on everything that had happened. But for now, he would focus on the film. There would be time to process the rest later. As the crew gathered around for the next scene, Keanu couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He had faced challenges on screen, sure, But the real challenge had been the one he faced off the screen. And now, with the neighborhood safe, Daisy by his side, and a film to finish, he felt a new sense of purpose, a sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, Keanu was at peace with his place in the world.